Hello, sleepyheads. I'm Elena Moon, and this is Sleepy Podcast. Before we begin, where in the world are you listening from? Take a moment, check the time where you are, and let me know in the comments. Whether it's 9 p.m. in Boston or 2 a.m. in Cairo, you're right on time. And if you'd like to be part of our quiet little corner of the world, just tap the red button and join the sleepy community. Now breathe deeply with me. Inhale and exhale, and let's drift back to a time of candlelit stone halls where shadows moved like ghosts across the walls and the scent of rosemary, tallow smoke, and rusting iron lingered in the air. The year is long past. The world is quieter now, slower, dressed in velvet and fear. You are in Tudor England. The walls are thick, the windows narrow, and the nights impossibly long. Here, in the heart of the palace, a king lies sleeping or trying to sleep. But first, before we peer into his darkened chamber, let us remember who he once was. There was once a boy with fire in his blood and sunlight in his hair. He danced, he jousted, he hunted through the forest like a lion among stags. They called him England's Golden Prince, the very image of youth and strength. When he became king, his voice rang through the halls like a bell of iron and promise. His eyes gleamed with certainty. He laughed loudly. He loved fiercely. But that was long ago. That was before the crown became heavy, before the throne became a prison of decisions, regrets, and ghosts. Now, let us move closer to the year 1546. The fires are low, the whispers are many, and the king is dying. He does not say so, of course. He does not speak of death, but it surrounds him. It lingers in the folds of the tapestries, in the silence that falls when he enters a room, in the glances exchanged between his physicians who carry more herbs than hope. Once, he wore plate armor like a second skin. Now he is carried. Once, he commanded vast armies. Now he cannot command his own legs to move. His body, swollen and sour with pain, is wrapped in silk, but no comfort comes. Once he was a lion of England, but now his body is a cage, and inside it, the lion growls. He is Henry, the eighth of his name, a man who broke the church for a woman, a man who made queens and unmade them with a signature. He had 6 wives. 2 lost their heads. 1 gave him the son he so desperately desired. But even the son, young Edward, is pale and often ill. Henry had ruled with fire and charm and fury. He had loved and lost. He had broken the world to shape it anew. But all of that, all the war, all the weddings, all the weeping, feels distant now. He cannot sleep. He is plagued by visions. His leg, once wounded in a joust, has rotted, a wound that never closed. It oozes, it stinks, and sometimes he believes it speaks to him. The surgeons come with blades and cloth, but nothing they do eases the fire. And so, night after night, he waits. He lies on his back, beneath heavy velvet sheets, a great canopy above him like the roof of a coffin. Outside, the wind whistles softly through the narrow windows. The tapestries sway like breathing things. The courtiers tiptoe past his chamber. The servants hold cloth to their faces. Once his presence was thunder. Now it is dread. He hears them speak in low tones. Of his smell, of his temper, of the rumors that swirl like candle smoke. Some say he is cursed. Some say the souls of his wives haunt him. Some say he is no longer a man at all, but something more monstrous, stitched together by pride and pain. In his dreams, if he can call them that, he sees faces. Anne Boleyn, Catherine of Aragon, Jane Seymour, each one silent, each one staring. Their eyes never blink. He wakes with a gasp, but no one is there. The guards outside do not ask if he is well. They know better. He had ordered men to death for less. And so they listen to the shuffle of linen, the muttered curses, the grinding of teeth. They know he is awake, and they know he is afraid. A king afraid, not of war, not of Spain, not even of rebellion, but of the thing that comes for all, no matter how many palaces they build. Death. Henry had defied popes, he had burned saints, he had rewritten the laws of heaven and earth. But now, as the fire in his hearth dies to embers, he cannot rewrite his own ending. And what an ending it will be, but not yet. First, let us walk backward, through the quiet corridors of memory to the days when Henry's crown shone brightest. He was not always feared. Once he was adored. As a young king, he played music. He wrote poetry. He danced for hours. He wore colors, gold, crimson, sapphire. And he smiled. Not the twisted grime would later sculpt across his face, but a real, generous smile. People loved him. They believed in him. They called him Bluff King Hal, a man of the people. And for a time, it was true. But time has teeth, and it gnawed at him slowly. A lost son, a bitter queen, a hungry heart. The years piled up like stones, and with every stone he grew colder. Every betrayal, every funeral, every failed heir, it all hardened him, until even his own reflection was a stranger. Now the mirror is covered. There are no more dances, no more poetry, only pain and silence. And yet there is something still human in his eyes, a flicker, a question perhaps. Did I do right? Was I a good king? Did God smile on my crown? But no answers come. Only the wind, just outside the window. Only the whisper of distant footsteps, careful not to wake the monster. You may wonder, why linger here? Why tell the story of a dying king in the darkness? Because in the end, even lions must lie down. Even kings must face the long night. And sometimes, in the stillness of their fall, we learn more than in the roar of their rule. So, come closer. Let us walk deeper into this twilight. Let us stand at the edge of the firelight and watch as it flickers over royal flesh, now ruined. Let us listen, gently, to the last sighs of a man who once commanded the world. For soon, very soon, the breath will slow, the light will dim, and the great King of England will meet the silence he so long tried to defy. But not yet. There are still stories in these halls, still echoes to follow. So come, quietly now. Step with me into the year 1546, where the king's breath grows heavier and the candles burn low. The night deepens, and in the grand bed beneath a canopy of Damascus oak, the lion fades. His breath, once deep and strong, comes now in rasps, shallow, uneven, wet. His frame, once carved by youth and war, has grown monstrous, his legs swollen like tree trunks, his belly vast, round, cruelly alive with pulsing pain. His once proud shoulders now sag forward like a broken statue. The man who once split armor in jousts, who danced from sunrise to dusk, now must be lifted, turned, cleaned, by hands that flinch at his groans. He is large, too large, over 400 pounds. No chair can hold him without creaking. No stairs can carry him without danger. And so the carpenters came. They built ramps. They built thrones that could tilt and recline. They carved wheelchairs with gilded handles. Still, none could move him without pain. His clothes, once tailored like royal art, now gape and strain at the seams. His gowns, threaded with gold and lions and Tudor roses, struggle to contain the folds of aching flesh. Each seam is a battlefield, each step a punishment. The courtiers avert their eyes, the tailors say nothing, they sew and resew and bring more fabric, but no thread can stitch together a broken body. And beneath those silks lies something far worse. His leg, once powerful, now pitiful. A wound opened long ago in a joust, it had never truly closed. Now it weeps, the skin is raw, black at the edges, cracked, hot. And when the wrappings are removed, the smell escapes first. A sour, iron stench, like blood and old milk and rot. The physicians approach, hands shaking beneath their sleeves. They say words like ointment, balm, circulation. But none look him in the eye. The wound is packed with lint and linen, sometimes with crushed pearls or powders made from old bones, sometimes with nothing at all, because nothing helps. Maggots are seen, sometimes welcomed. They clean the dead flesh, one whispers. But Henry does not want to hear it. He snarls, he threatens, but the maggots remain. They move through him, silent and diligent, tiny servants of decay. Perfume is poured, vanilla, rose, cinnamon, anything to mask the scent of sorrow. But it seeps through. The courtiers know it before he enters. The dogs whimper when he approaches. And in the stillness of midnight, the scent crawls through the palace like a fog no door can stop. He tries to sleep, but sleep is unkind. When it comes, it drags him through fire. He dreams of his wives, Anne's eyes wide and endless, Jane's pale hands folded in death, Catherine weeping as he turned his back. And when he wakes, it is worse, because he is still here, still in this body, still in this skin, still in this pain. Opiates are brought, thick syrups, bitter powders. They dull him, but only a little. Sometimes he slurs, sometimes he forgets who has entered the room, but the pain always remembers. It returns like a tide, crashing, crashing. He moans, loudly, without shame now. The walls hear it. The servants pretend they do not. But every night, as the clock chimes, his voice joins the bells, a low, human wailing that wraps around the hour like a dying prayer. His physicians whisper when they think he sleeps. They do not agree. Syphilis, one mutters. It has rotted his brain. No, says another. It's diabetes. He is poisoned by his own blood. A third leans closer. I've seen this before, in a beast with Cushing's malady, the swelling, the rage, but none are certain. None will tell him. Because what could he do? No potion mends the soul. No balm soothes the mind unraveling, and the king does not want answers. He wants peace or silence or both. He wishes only to stop remembering. But memories cling. They crawl up the curtains. They drift in through the cracks. He remembers being young, laughing, kissing, running. He remembers chasing deer with his brother Arthur. He remembers the day Arthur died and the cold chill of inheritance that crept in behind the crown. He remembers Anne walking away from him in dreams. He remembers Jane giving him a son and then giving him grief. He remembers Cromwell's blood, Moore's smile, Wolsey's last letter. Too much, too much. And now his own body betrays him, daily. He eats less now, but gains more. His hands shake, his tongue feels thick, his skin burns and then freezes. Sometimes he sees things in the corner of the room. Sometimes he speaks to them. His last wife, Catherine Parr, comes rarely now. She brings books, she prays with him. But even she does not stay past dusk. And who could blame her? For Henry is no longer truly a man. He is a monument to pain. A towering ruin in red velvet and gold. The lion is dying, but lions do not die gently. They rage, they claw at the air, they roar in silence. And so he lingers, each hour a curse, each step a memory, each night a trial. And yet there is still pride, even as his leg bleeds onto the sheets, even as his flesh bursts from the seams, even as his breath catches in his chest, he still wears the crown, still signs the laws, still commands the world to pretend. Pretend he is strong. Pretend he is eternal. Pretend. And they do. They bow. They flatter. Even the surgeons call him majesty, even as they pack his wounds with wine-soaked gauze. Because even rotting, even bloated, he is still the king. But the mirror knows. The mirror remembers. It is covered now. No one must see. No one must look. And still, beneath the silk canopy, as the fire fades, the lion does not sleep. He lies awake, listening to the soft tick of the palace clock, feeling his blood, beaten wounds that will not close. And in the quiet, his mind begins to drift, not into sleep, but into memory. It wanders now through long corridors, into locked rooms, and down into darker places, places no king should go, places only the dying visit. And as his body begins to fail, so too does his mind begin to wander, through halls of regret and gardens of grief and the faces of those he can never ask for forgiveness. He sees them, he hears them. He is not alone, but neither is he at peace. And so we leave him there for now, lying in velvet, wrapped in shadows, breathing shallow, drifting far into a kingdom not made of stone and banners, but of memory and pain. The fire crackles, the candles bleed wax onto the polished floor, and Henry, he begins to see things that aren't really there. At first, it's the mirror. He sits before it, barely breathing, wrapped in ermine, draped in silk. But the man in the glass does not look like him. The jaw is heavy, the eyes sunken, the skin pale as chalk. That is not a king. That is a stranger. He turns the mirror to the wall. From now on, he will trust no reflection, not the silver tray, not the wine goblet, not even the still surface of his bathwater. They all lie. They all show him someone else. He begins to suspect his servants. Their hands move too quickly. Their eyes linger too long. They whisper behind doors. They speak in languages he does not understand. He dismisses one, then another, then 5 more. New ones arrive. He does not trust them either. Even his food must be tasted thrice. He imagines poison in the pie crust, whispers in the wine. Once he roared with laughter in the great hall. Now he barely speaks above a breath, because the walls, they are listening. Even the dogs, he thinks, watch him too closely. He keeps the curtains closed. He locks the inner doors. He hides a dagger under his pillow, another beneath the mattress, and when he sleeps, he dreams, not of angels, but of women. Anne comes first, in white. She glides through the gallery with bare feet and knowing eyes. Her neck is too thin, her voice too sweet. She does not blink. He wakes, heart pounding. Then Jane, holding a swaddled child, smiling. She doesn't speak, but the baby does. It whispers secrets into her arms, secrets he cannot hear. Then Catherine, weeping. Then Anne of Cleves, silent in shadow. Catherine Howard, always Catherine. Sometimes she sings, sometimes she only screams. He cries out in the dark, but no one comes. The guards are told not to enter unless summoned. They obey, even when he screams. He begins to see the ghosts by day, reflected in windows, standing near the fireplace, just for a moment, then gone. No one else sees them, but Henry does. They do not speak to him. They simply wait. He begins to forget things, the names of men he's known for years, the location of doors he once passed daily. He calls for his son, then forgets why. Edward. The boy is delicate, too delicate, a candle in the wind. Henry stares at him across the chamber, so small, so pale. Can he carry the crown? He imagines Edward's crown slipping sideways, the weight too much for such a narrow neck. He thinks of Mary, her dark eyes, her fierceness. She prays too often, she listens too closely. Then Elizabeth, quiet, always watching. There are storms in their eyes, both of them. He cannot tame them, he cannot hold them. They are his daughters, but they are not his to command, not anymore. And so the future twists, unclear, fractured, like stained glass dropped on stone. What will become of England when the lion no longer roars? In the court, whispers tighten. The corridors grow colder. The servants speak less. Even the nobles walk more softly. They pass him like shadows, moving like mice along the edge of the rug, afraid to make eye contact, afraid to speak. The palace is hushed, but the silence is not peace. It is dread. No one says it aloud, but they all feel it. The king is fading, and when he goes, what will be left? He begins to hear footsteps. At night, in the walls, he orders the guards to search. Nothing. Still, they return, scraping, dragging, whispers. The tapestries shiver without wind, the candles dim without breath. One night, he finds writing on his chamber wall. 3 words. They are erased before anyone else sees them. He never says what they were. But after that, he stops sleeping altogether. He stares at the fire until it dies. He counts the seconds until dawn. He begins to talk to people who are not there, sometimes to his mother, sometimes to God, sometimes to someone. No one can name. His words make less sense. His letters go unfinished. His thoughts unravel like thread, tugged by unseen fingers. The doctors try to comfort him. It is fever, they say. It will pass. But they are wrong. This is not fever. This is not passing. This is the end. And then morning, the sun does not rise in his chambers, not because the heavens forgot him, but because he did not ask for the curtains to be drawn. He lies still, eyes open but distant. No commands, no groans, no fury, only silence. The lion has stopped roaring, but he has not stopped seeing, and somewhere in the stillness of that chamber he watches the shadows move and waits for the last of them to step forward. The moon hung low over Whitehall. The tapestries did not stir. The hearth had burned down to ash, and in the king's chamber all was still. No priest came, no choir, no final blessing whispered into trembling ears, only the creak of the floorboards, the soft rustle of bed sheets, and the heavy sound of a breath that came slower and slower still. He had reigned over the rise and ruin of thousands. He had broken a nation to rebuild it in his image. But on this final night, he could not command even his own lungs to obey. The bed was vast, carved oak, canopied in velvet. It had held queens, it had held dreams. Now it held a man waiting to die. His fingers twitched beneath the covers, searching, grasping for something long since lost. He blinked once, twice, then not again. Some say his soul clung to the bed curtains, that it lingered in the folds of the fabric, unwilling to go, unwilling to leave the world it had once commanded. Others say he died with his eyes open, as if surprised, as if angry, as if still expecting applause. But no applause came, only silence, not even a sob, for there were no wives left to mourn him, no sons old enough to understand, no courtiers brave enough to grieve aloud. Just silence, the deep, echoing silence that follows the death of a lion. When the physicians came, they did not weep. They whispered among themselves, dipped their quills, signed their names. The king was dead. It was the 28th of January, 1547. The sun rose slowly, as if reluctant. The death was not announced for days. They wrapped his body in cloth and secrecy. They kept the corridors dim, the candles low. England needed time to prepare its face. The great lion had fallen, and the court could not afford to stumble in its shadow. Preparations began. The coffin, massive, thick with lead, was sealed, painted with gold, lined with velvet. They placed it in the chapel, alone, guarded not by soldiers, but by silence. And then the myths began. Some say the body began to swell. The rot crept faster than the guards could watch, faster than the embalmers could contain. The wounds in his legs, untouched and blackened, leaked beneath the wrappings. The room grew heavy with odor. No rosewater could mask it. The stench was grief's twin. Then came the most whispered tale of all. They say that on the fourth night, beneath the moonlight, the coffin burst, a muffled sound, like a sigh or a pop. Some say it was the gases, the pressure of death demanding release. Others speak in hushed tones of divine punishment, of the body refusing rest, of sin rising to the surface one last time. Guards were posted at the doors. They claimed nothing happened. They always claimed nothing happened. But no one lingered in the chapel after sunset. Not after that. When the procession finally moved toward Windsor, it passed through villages hushed in reverence. The people watched from behind shutters, heads bowed, hands clasped. They had loved him. They had feared him. They had obeyed. And now they watched his coffin rattle over cobblestones, as if the king inside still stirred, still demanded attention. When the crypt yawned open, cold and waiting, he was lowered into the vault, without trumpet, without weeping, just the groan of stone, the scrape of chains, the hush of dust returning to dust. He was placed beside Jane Seymour, the only wife to give him a son, the only one he claimed to have truly loved. The vault was sealed, but the whispers did not end. Some claimed wolves gathered near the grounds that night. Others heard voices in the corridors, footsteps, and dragging chains. The guards swore it was the wind, but the wind does not groan like a man with bleeding legs. Years later, a soldier claimed to see a figure in the mist, crowned, limping, weeping. But the palace does not sleep. Beneath the stone archways and tapestried corridors, whispers still linger like candle smoke. Not all ghosts walk on 2 feet. Some drift between glances. Others curl in the corners of cautious thoughts. And in the days after Henry's death, the Tudor court became a cathedral of quiet fear. Let us walk there now, softly, where the air tastes of ink and beeswax, and the light from the high windows falls like faded gold on trembling hands. Behind one of those windows, in a quiet chamber lined with books and shadows, Catherine Parr sat alone in her room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. No black veil, no public tears. Queens learned early. Mourning was as much a performance as marriage. She had survived him. That was no small thing. 6 queens had once stood beside Henry. 5 had fallen. She alone had endured. The quiet consort who read aloud to soothe his pains, who kissed his brow when the ulcers burned, who whispered scripture into a tempest. Now she whispered nothing. Some said she cried only once, in the early hours, in her linen shift, when the palace was still and no one could hear. She had loved him, in a way, feared him, certainly. But now she feared the silence more, for in that silence was freedom and danger. She was a rich widow now, a queen dowager, and the eyes of men would turn toward her again. But in her dreams she still heard his voice, calling for more wine, cursing the ache in his bones, asking if she still loved him, even when he could no longer rise from the bed. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Did her love remain? It was a stark contrast to the hushed tones that snaked through the narrow corridors behind the royal chambers, where the servants whispered secrets of their own. Not loudly, of course. The walls had ears. They always had. But when the king was alive, the fear was sharp, immediate. A shout, a dismissal, a head lost before morning. Now the fear was stranger. He was dead. But somehow it felt as though he was still watching, still listening. They had seen things they would never say aloud. The royal bed still warm with sickness, the sheets soaked and stained, the body swollen and still, the smell like old meat and flowers left too long in the vase. They covered their mouths when they passed the bedchamber, even after it had been sealed. And in the kitchens, they muttered prayers under their breath, not for the king, but for themselves, that they might not be chosen to serve the next one, Edward. In a quiet nursery far from the main wing, a boy clutched a wooden lion in one small hand. Edward, prince no longer, now the king. But he was only 9 years old. The nurses spoke gently when he was awake, but when he slept, they whispered over his head, "He's too small. He's always cold." Do you think he understands what's happened? He had not cried, not once, even when they dressed him in new silks, even when they told him that his father had gone to heaven. But he watched everything. He watched the courtiers bow lower than before. He watched the men in dark robes come to speak with his uncle. He watched as one nurse wrapped up the old wooden cradle and whispered, "No more children now." He was a candle flame in a winter draft, and already others were moving to shield him or snuff him out. Elsewhere in the palace, 2 women sat apart. They were not queens, not yet, not truly, but their blood was royal. Their names were sharp as glass. Mary, the elder, pale, devout, watchful. She crossed herself when the news came, closed her eyes, and murmured a prayer for her father's soul. But in her chest a storm curled. He had cast her mother aside, called her a bastard, made her kneel before Parliament. Now the great king is gone, and the church he'd torn apart might crumble with him. She waited, Elizabeth, the younger, red-haired, fox-eyed, silent. She did not weep, did not pray, but she watched, she listened. She knew that everything had changed. The world no longer turned around her father's moods, and for the first time she was dangerous. She sat by a frost-clouded window and traced a circle in the glass. A sun, a crown. They called her illegitimate, but she knew her time would come. She, too, was her father's child, and lions leave more than one cub behind. And beyond the chamber doors, beyond the reach of the crown and cradle, one more figure waited in the dark, not yet seen, but already part of the story. In the cold stone belly of the Tower of London, the Duke of Norfolk sat in shadow. Thomas Howard, nobleman, soldier, schemer. Once he had ruled beside the king, his armor shining beside Henry's in battle, his voice shaping the policies of the realm. He had helped crush the Catholic uprising in the north. He had guided the young king through war and rebellion. He had been trusted, even revered. But power is a flickering candle in the Tudor court. One shift of the wind, and the light gutters. The Howards had climbed too high. His niece, Anne Boleyn, had once been queen and then beheaded. Another niece, Catherine Howard, caught the king's eye and married him, only to lose her head as well. The family name, once gilded, became stained with blood and suspicion. And now Thomas, once Earl Marshal, once the king's companion, sat in chains. Enemies had whispered. The king, bloated with fear and age, had listened. The duke had been arrested for treason. They said he kept a coat of arms too proud, that he dreamed of ruling after Henry died. He was sentenced to death. The date was set, the scaffold readied, and then fate laughed. Henry died before the axe could fall. The execution was stayed. A single heartbeat spared him. Some say the guards told him by candlelight, in a hush, as if the tower walls themselves might be listening, that the duke blinked and then laughed. A thin, brittle sound, like dry leaves skittering across a tomb. He would live, but not as a man of power, not as a voice in council, not even as a free soul. He would never again walk the palace halls, never ride out under royal banners, never feel the weight of command or the warmth of firelight in the king's court. He was left to rot in silence. Through long winters and damp summers, he watched the stone walls weep. He heard footsteps echo past his cell, never slowing, never for him. He dreamed of feasts, of tournaments, of hunting cries in the forest. But when he opened his eyes, there was only gray, forgotten, like so many others who had flown too close to the sun and fallen. But the fall of one man is never the end. Not in a court built on secrets and silk, for when one star burns out, others begin to flicker. And so, power does not sleep when kings die, it stirs. The day Henry was buried, the court began to shift. Advisors met in private chambers. Seals were stamped, letters sent, promises broken before the ink could dry. The crown may rest on Edward's head, but it was too heavy for a child to carry. So others reached for it. Regents, uncles, ambitious lords and careful queens, some with smiles, others with daggers in their eyes. They walked softly through the halls, these men of shadow, but their hearts beat loud, with greed, with hope, with the knowledge that Henry was no longer there to thunder his disapproval. The lion's roar had ceased. Now came the jackals. But even as ambition bloomed in hushed corners and whispered chambers, the world outside remained still. Hampton Court, Whitehall, Windsor. They stood as they always had, great bones of a kingdom, wrapped in stone and shadow. Once they had echoed with the sounds of feasts and declarations, of hunts returning and foreign envoys arriving. They were more than palaces. They were mirrors of Henry's will. Hampton Court had been his jewel, seized from Cardinal Wolsey, reshaped to reflect the king's own glory. Its tapestries once shimmered with gold thread, its kitchens fed hundreds, and its gardens bloomed under the careful eye of kings. Whitehall, vast and ever-expanding, had become the beating heart of royal power, its galleries stretching long and cold, its walls painted with images of a monarch as Mars, as Solomon, as something almost divine. And Windsor was older than all of them, a fortress turned cradle of kingship, a place of burials and coronations, oaths and secrets. Stone upon stone, flag fluttering on high towers. But they, too, remembered the echo of boots, the rattle of chains, the thump of a cane against marble floors. Even now, some said, you could hear it. Late at night, when the lamps were out, when the silence stretched, a groan, a whisper, a breath drawn too deep, the sound of a heavy man rising slowly from a chair. The king was dead, but his shadow was long, and the air beneath the Tudor rose still smelled faintly of sweat, blood, and regret. And though the lion now lay silent, the ripples of his reign drifted on, through corridors and memories, through dreams that refused to fade. So we leave the court now, quietly. Let the nobles plot, let the children dream, let the ghosts pace their gilded cages. The story of Henry is over, but the story of his world continues, softly, relentlessly. Like the hush of velvet slippers down a midnight hall, each step heavy with fear and ambition. And as those footsteps fade into the dark, let us linger for just a moment longer to ponder the weight of it all. For power, dear listener, is a fleeting dream, a crown, just a circle of metal, a throne, just a chair. But the night is long and soft and kind. But now the halls are quiet. The king is gone. The crown rests heavy on velvet untouched, and the fires in the hearth burn low, not out, but weary. Still, long after the final footstep has faded, the questions remain. What is kingship truly? Is it gold or is it ash? A symbol of glory or a symbol of solitude? Was Henry ever truly happy? He had palaces, he had armies, he had rooms full of silver and silence. He had men who knelt when he passed and women who whispered prayers with his name wrapped inside. But in the quiet hours, when the torches flickered and the air grew heavy, did he feel peace? Or did his thoughts circle like wolves, never quite letting him rest? Perhaps in the shadows, he dreamed of simpler things. The sweet bite of wine before it soured, the laughter of a child before it was shaped by duty, the look of love before suspicion found it. He held power, but never stillness. He ruled kingdoms, but not his own mind. And when the pain returned, when sleep would not come, and the walls creaked under memory, who whispered comfort then? A crown is a curious thing. It shines in the light, yes, but it tightens in the dark. It presses thought into duty, hope into strategy, joy into calculation. It is both a symbol and a silence. It speaks, and it demands to be spoken for. Could he ever take it off, even for a moment? Even when the rooms were empty, and the moonlight fell like silver dust across his chamber floor, did he ever wish to be no one at all? No titles, no robes, no legacy, just a man, breathing. There are stories, soft and slow, of kings who wept when no one watched, of rulers who feared the dark, not because of what was in it, but because of what they saw reflected back at them. Their own faces, older, worn, alone. Power in its way protects, it builds walls, it commands voices, it offers feasts, but it cannot keep out the ache. Henry built walls taller than most, castles, laws, fear, but walls do not stop loneliness, they only give it room to echo. He was not the only one. All kings in time learn that thrones are not chairs, they are burdens, they remember too much. They dig into the spine, they weigh down the breath, they leave bruises no one sees. And perhaps that is why, even now, the stories cling to him, why the wind still carries his name through stone corridors, why the tapestries seem to shiver when no one touches them, why the portraits seem to stare just a little too long, because some part of him is still searching, still asking, was it worth it? The glory, the wars, the wives, the silence, the obedience, the executions. Did any of it ease the ache in his bones? Or did the years pass like a slow procession? Beautiful, yes, but cold. He was a king, but he was also a boy once. There was a time when he ran, laughed, fell in the grass, and bled freely, before the robes, before the sword, before the crown. Did he remember that boy in his final hours? Did he envy him? Sometimes the richest man is the one who feels light, light of guilt, light of duty, light of legacy. Kingship is heavy. It is made of memory and mistake, made of expectation and fear. A man may carry it for decades and never grow used to the weight. Some thrones are wood, some are gold, but all of them are hard, and they all grow cold, even in summer. And now we wonder, what is legacy? Is it statues, portraits, names etched into time, or is it something quieter, something lonelier? A question left behind, a whisper in the dark. Did I matter? Was I loved? Was I more than the pain I caused? Perhaps that is the curse of kingship, not just to rule, but to be remembered, to live forever in stories, but never again as a person, only as a symbol, a lesson, a warning. And what of us? We who walk without crowns, who dream in smaller rooms, do we too seek thrones of our own? Praise, control, legacy? We rise early, we push hard, we gather accomplishments, but sometimes we forget to rest. What is power in the end if it cannot grant peace? What is success if it cannot offer stillness? What is ambition if it steals our sleep? And what is a crown, really, if it cannot quiet the mind at night? So rest now. Let the kings have their palaces. Let the world spin without you for a while. You are not in a throne room. You are in a bed, and you have done enough for today. You need not be remembered in books. You need not be perfect. You need not carry the weight of crowns or history. You need only this, to let go, to let your breath soften, to let your thoughts drift like feathers, to let your eyes close. You are not haunted, you are not judged, you are simply safe. The ghosts may whisper, but they do not rule you. The worries may knock, but they will fade. You are still, you are free, you are at last allowed to sleep. So let us leave Henry to his shadows. Let him walk the galleries alone if he must. Let the past hold him gently, and may your own dreams be lighter than his. Let us turn now from the battlefield of power to the quiet corners of the heart. For even kings must look into the eyes of their children and see, reflected there, all that they built and all that they broke. Henry Tudor, Henry VIII, father of 3 crowned children, yet how little warmth passed between those gilded rooms. Edward, his longed-for son, his fragile prize, born of Jane Seymour, the only wife Henry claimed to have truly loved, and yet Jane died before the boy's cries had even softened, and Henry, too bound in mourning, too burdened with ulcers and rule, rarely cradled him. They say he watched Edward more like a sacred relic than a son, a symbol, a vessel, not a child with tears, laughter, or dreams, but a future in human form. He was educated by scholars, nursed by servants, guarded like a treasure. And in the cold hallways, the boy learned Latin before he learned love. Sometimes Henry would summon him just to look, to see that the Tudor name would continue, even if through pale hands and shallow breath. But the boy's cough echoed through the nursery, a candle that flickered even then, and Henry already smelled the ash on the wind. Mary, his firstborn, his pearl, once called the Princess of Wales, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, she had danced at court with sunlight in her hair and roses on her sleeves. But when Henry tore England from Rome, he also tore Mary from her mother. She was declared illegitimate, stripped of title, banished from court, told to never again call herself princess. And Catherine, her proud Spanish mother, died in exile, her heart never healed. Mary never forgave the silence, nor the cruelty. And Henry perhaps never forgave the reflection of Catherine in his daughter's eyes. Still, he brought her back, eventually. But something remained frozen between them. She smiled, he nodded. But their words came like frost on glass, visible, cold, and never quite touching. Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, born into scandal, crowned with suspicion. And when her mother was beheaded, Elizabeth was not yet 3. Henry never spoke of Anne again, and Elizabeth learned not to ask. He, too, had her declared illegitimate. He, too, kept her at arm's length until the final years. And yet, they say he admired her mind, saw his own cleverness reflected back. Not love, perhaps, but recognition. When she danced at court, he would smile, but never too long, never too soft. She learned to bow perfectly, to speak carefully, to survive. She would grow into a queen more feared and more brilliant than he. But she learned it not from his affection, only from his distance. What kind of father builds an empire and leaves 3 children afraid to speak freely in his presence? What kind of love is measured in titles restored rather than lullabies sung? In his final months, Henry had his will revised. He confirmed the order of succession, Edward, then Mary, then Elizabeth. It was a gesture of reconciliation, political, practical. But did he write it with love, or merely the cold fingers of a dying hand, signing peace with ghosts he would never face? There is a painting, a famous one. It shows Henry at the center, seated like a god. Jane Seymour at his side, though she was long dead when it was painted. Edward beside him, Mary and Elizabeth nearby. A perfect image, but a lie. They were never together like that. Not once. The family existed only in fragments, letters, glances, political favors. And in the flicker of candlelight, perhaps Henry wondered what he'd truly left behind. In his final days, when the ulcers wept and the moans echoed, some say he asked for Edward, but the boy was too delicate to see a rotting father. The physicians whispered, no, it would frighten him. And so Henry died, without his son's hand in his, without Mary's forgiveness, without Elizabeth's goodbye. He had built a dynasty, but never a home. So when you think of the mighty kings, think also of the little rooms they leave behind, the children with heavy names and heavier hearts, the portraits that never spoke, the silences that shaped a nation. Henry VIII ruled by fear, fire, and faith, but in his final moments, he was only a man, a father, alone in the dark. The tapestries no longer stirred at his command. The throne stood cold, and as he closed his eyes for the last time, perhaps he dreamed. They said dreams were warnings, shadows sent from the other side, and it was never truly silent. Even in royal chambers where tapestries muffled the wind and thick stone walls held out the cold, there was always something lingering, an echo, a creak, a breath not your own. The Tudors lived in a world woven tightly with superstition, where fate whispered through omens, and death was never far from the hearth. Sleep, they believed, was a doorway. When one's eyes closed, the soul wandered. And who could say if it would return? It was common then to speak of sleep as a little death, a kind cousin to the final silence. Some feared it not because of restlessness, but because of what might come in the dark. To fall asleep was to drift into a place where the veil between worlds thinned. It was there, they said, that spirits waited. Some were gentle, but others hungry. The Tudors saw signs in everything. A black dog seen at dawn might mean someone nearby would not live to see nightfall. A bird tapping at a window, the howling of wind in an odd direction, a mirror cracking for no reason, each carried its own shadow. Comets streaking across the sky were not beautiful. They were portents, burning spears from God's displeasure. One such comet, they believed, had blazed above the skies shortly before the death of Prince Arthur, Henry's elder brother. And again, so they whispered, before Queen Jane Seymour took to bed with child, never to rise again. Dreams, too, were studied like scripture. A dream of water foretold tears. A dream of teeth falling out, a death in the family. And those who dreamed of coffins, well, they rarely spoke of it, not aloud. To die without warning was seen as dangerous. How would one prepare the soul? That's why dreams were treasured, not just for their mystery, but for the time they gave. The Tudors feared sudden death not only for its cruelty, but for its spiritual danger. For if one died without confession, without absolution, they would die unshriven. An unshriven soul, they believed, wandered, restless, rootless, seeking forgiveness it could no longer ask for. These spirits were said to haunt graveyards, lonely bridges, and sometimes even palaces. There are records, softly buried in letters and journals, of servants refusing to enter certain rooms after dark, not out of laziness, but out of quiet, shaking fear. They claimed the old halls of Whitehall breathed at night, that Hampton Court grew colder in summer than it should, and that, sometimes, when one passed the Royal Chapel at dusk, they could hear footsteps in the empty loft above, slow, dragging. A king had died there once, they said, and not every part of him had moved on. The Tudors believed the body was ruled by humors, 4 vital fluids that must remain in harmony: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness, madness, even nightmares had to be signs of imbalance. And the remedy? Bloodletting. It was common, even noble, to let blood from the arm or ankle when fever or melancholy struck. Some did it to clear the mind, others to drive out tainted thoughts that might rise like mists in the night. There were even those who insisted that bloodletting before sleep could ensure quieter dreams. A troubled night, after all, was a warning. The body was not right, and neither perhaps was the soul. But it was not only the body that needed watching. The heavens, too, told stories. The stars were God's parchment, and astrologers, often respected advisors, read the skies like physicians read the pulse. When Henry VIII was born, it was under a favorable alignment of planets. Many declared him touched by destiny, and when he neared death, the same stars flickered coldly in unfamiliar patterns. Some believed it was not his illness that doomed him, but the movement of Saturn and Mars. Cold, unforgiving. Astrology was consulted before great decisions, battles, marriages, even childbirth. If a comet flared, it could delay a royal procession. If the moon was in the wrong house, a wedding might be quietly rescheduled. And dreams, too, were read through that same lens. Celestial messages delivered while the body slept. One Tudor midwife wrote in her diary, "The queen dreamt of a black swan swimming backward. I fear her child will not draw breath." And so it was. Dreams that touched the dead. To dream of the dead was seen as dangerous, but not uncommon. In dreams, they might speak or watch or simply stand. If a lost loved one visited in a dream and said nothing, it was a sign of peace. But if they reached for you, called your name, or turned away as if in sorrow, something was wrong. Perhaps you had forgotten to pray for them. Perhaps they could not rest. Some women slept with iron scissors under their pillows to keep away hungry spirits. Others sprinkled holy water near the bed, or hung sprigs of dried sage and lavender over the door. It was said that ghosts favored the silent hours between midnight and 3. And if you awoke suddenly then, you were not alone. In Tudor England, death was rarely a surprise, not because of medicine, but because the world itself whispered warnings. A howling dog beneath a window, especially if it was black, was a sign that someone in the house would soon perish. If the family candle flickered strangely or guttered out for no reason, it was said a soul nearby had been claimed. And if the clock stopped at an odd hour, it was not seen as a mechanical fault, but a moment recorded by the beyond. Dreams, too, delivered premonitions. To dream of teeth falling out meant death in the family. To walk alone through a churchyard was to risk losing your place among the living. And to see yourself from above, hovering, watching your own sleeping body, was to knock upon the gates of the other world. Even the simplest things were loaded with fear. A robin tapping at your window pane, a mirror cracked in the morning light, a chill that passed through a warm room. Old nurses spoke of the death breath, a sudden stillness, a thickening of the air. Not cold, just wrong. When Henry's own death approached, some said the birds at Hampton Court had flown away 2 days before. Others claimed they saw a hooded figure kneeling in the gardens at dawn, its face obscured, its shadow stretching against the palace stones. Of course, none dared speak of it until after the king had died. For in Tudor England, such signs were not dismissed. They were endured in silence. People watched, they waited, they whispered behind closed doors. And when night fell, they lay still, listening, because sleep was not trusted. In bed, with the hearth burning low, the line between worlds blurred. Some priests called sleep a rehearsal, a soft, daily dying to prepare for the real thing. Because what is sleep, really? Your eyes close, your body stills, the world vanishes, and sometimes you do not wake. That was the fear. It was common for the elderly or the guilty to avoid sleep when ill. Better to stay upright, surrounded by prayer, than risk slipping into death unnoticed. The unshriven, those who died without confession or final rites, were said to wander for eternity, lost between two realms, dragging invisible chains behind them. Children were taught bedtime prayers not just for comfort, but for protection. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Even that gentle verse held a blade behind its back, because in the Tudor mind, the darkness was never empty. They said ghosts did not wander aimlessly. They returned for a reason. Perhaps a soul had been wronged, perhaps justice had not been done, perhaps a promise was broken, or maybe simply the grave had not held strong enough to keep the spirit in. In Tudor times, ghosts were not merely spooky stories. They were warnings, messages, echoes of unfinished lives. Some wore white, drifting like mist through halls. Others appeared solid as men, speaking in riddles, clutching the wounds they died from. But the worst were the silent ones. They stood at the edge of beds. They watched from corners. They breathed at your ear when you were too tired to move. Henry VIII's palaces were thick with such tales. At Hampton Court, long after his death, guards would whisper of footsteps pacing the gallery at midnight, slow, uneven, one leg dragging behind. No one ever saw the figure's face, only its shadow, long and bent, cast against candlelit walls. Others spoke of Anne Boleyn, her ghost flitting down the staircases in white, cradling her head in her arms. They said Henry once awoke screaming, convinced he'd heard her laugh in the dark. It was not uncommon, they said, for kings and queens to be haunted by the ones they condemned. For power leaves a residue, and regret is a stubborn ghost. And so, as the fire faded and the hour deepened, Tudor men and women would lie in their beds, hands folded across their chests, minds racing with the old fears. Would this be the night? Would sleep slip too far? They listened for creaks, for sighs, for the wind that spoke with voices it should not have. They dreamed of rivers that pulled them under, of churches where no priest stood, of corridors with no end, of faces they'd forgotten, but which remembered them. And when they woke, breathless and pale, they would whisper thanks to God, or light a candle, or leave a coin beneath their pillow, just in case the dead had come close. Because in Tudor England, sleep was never just rest. It was a door, and no one ever knew for sure what stood on the other side. Some said angels, others shadows, but for one pale boy in a crown too large for his head, what waited on the other side was a throne, and behind that throne, whispers, expectations, and a fate carved before he ever spoke a word. They crowned him too soon. 9 years old, thin as a reed, crowned in robes that swallowed his frame, Edward VI, son of Henry VIII, was a child set adrift in a sea of thrones, politics, and whispers. The crown pressed heavy upon a brow still smooth with innocence. They said he was clever, more book than boy, but cleverness does not protect from fate, not in Tudor England, and certainly not under the long shadow of his father. Henry had wanted a son, had split a country, spilled blood, and shattered marriages to get one, but the boy he left behind was not the warrior king he had dreamed of. Edward was quiet, sickly, his eyes often tired, his voice thin, his hands trembling when he signed documents far too grim for childhood. He was always watched, by protectors, by schemers, by ghosts. In the night, they say Edward would wake coughing, deep, racking spells that left blood on his sleeves and fear in his breath. He was rarely alone. Servants waited with cloths, with bowls, with herbal tonics steeped in honey and hope, but no remedy lasted. Some said he was born touched by a curse. Others whispered of poison, an invisible plot to rid the kingdom of its fragile boy king. But more often it was simply called what it was: consumption, tuberculosis, the wasting disease, the slow thief of Tudor lungs. Even in portraits painted to flatter him, the shadows are there, beneath his eyes, beneath the skin, his spine stiff, his gaze distant, as if already staring into another world. The halls he ruled were not his own. Every word he spoke was weighed. Every decree ghost-written by lords in wigs and whispers. He was a monarch in name, a child in truth. And in the end, he faded like a candle choking on air. At 15, Edward was dead. His body was buried in Westminster Abbey, beneath stone, beneath scripture, beneath a legacy that barely had time to bloom. There were no sons left, no clear heirs, just 2 daughters, one Catholic, one Protestant, and the embers of a kingdom ready to burn again. But some say Edward still walks, not in rage like his father, but in quiet, a pale shape drifting near the chapel's altar, his crown too big, his eyes too tired, looking perhaps not for a throne, but for the childhood he never had. And if sleep hasn't found you yet, don't worry. Another story is just a whisper away. Until next time, sweet dreams.